Hi, everyone. This is Emma and Cindy with March on the Pentagon, and we're doing, instead of a community conference call this month for our community engagement, we have a live stream on our Facebook page.
Go ahead, my phone.
And a nice song.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we're going to get started soon. If you guys can
I'm on a conference call.
Share this so we can start getting some more viewers in. That would be awesome. So Cindy and I are here today with Robbie Martin, which I'm sure plenty of you are probably familiar with. Robbie is a filmmaker and a musician, and he does Media Roots Radio podcast with his sister Abby Martin, which I imagine most of you are also familiar with. And you can find that on SoundCloud. You just head to soundcloud.com, media/roots. You can check that out. I strongly recommend or encourage you to do that. So our topic today is war. What is it good for? Incredibly important question that a lot of us ask all the time. So we'll talk a bit about what war is good for and what war isn't good for, and the types of things that war takes away from here at home and in other places. So I'm going to hand it over to Cindy, and she's going to chat a little bit about Rage Against the War Machine and our plans for that, and what we did maybe while we were in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago, as I share this live stream in some other places. So, Cindy,
great.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you, Emma. So hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Emma, for putting this together. And thank you, Robbie. I've known Robbie for a long time. And it's nice to have him as our special guest for this evening's or this month's community conference call and for March on the Pentagon. So on July 7th and 8th, Emma and I were in Washington, D.C., and we, July 7th, we had our July planning meeting. And July 8th, we had a little demo in front of the White House to oppose war in Iran, and, well, war everywhere, but particularly getting in a more involved, the U.S. getting in a more involved war in Iran. And so you can see videos and pictures and stuff like that on our Facebook page, and also on our website, marchonpentagon.com. And so for October 11th and 12th, we're planning Rage Against the War Machine, and we are going to be, I can't talk and see. Can I minimize the chat right now? Anyway, it's very distracting for me. I have senior citizen ADD. But anyway, we're going to be starting at the White House and ending at the White House on October 11th. We're going to march to many different places in Washington, D.C. near the White House that my famous saying is, you can't swing a cat by the tail in Washington, D.C. without hitting a war criminal, poor cat. And so we're going to do this Rage Against the War Machine. And if you've been paying attention, you know that we have plenty of things to protest. We have plenty of opportunities around the White House to protest. And then we're going to have the Anti-Imperialist Revolution Summit on October 12th. So if you want to join the committee, let Emma know. You can let Emma know on Facebook. You can let Emma know at emma@marchonpentagon.com, or you can reach me on Facebook, or Cindy Sheehan at marchonpentagon.com. We're forming committees right now to get involved, so everybody can own this protest that is so desperately needed, an anti-imperialist protest. So Robbie Martin has agreed to come on our show. It's not a show, I'm sorry, I do have a show, on our conference call, or our big show. Hi, Robbie.
Hi,
Thank
Cindy.
you for coming on our big show today. And we will, of course, what do you call that? Tape this, record it, so people can see. We'll put it there on the old VHS, so people can order a VHS. And no, I'm just kidding. And so anyway, Robbie, our question today is war. What is it good for? And I'm pretty sure everybody who's watching this is going to agree that it's good for absolutely nothing, except that's not really true. Like we said in our posting about this, war is good for profit for the few, environmental destruction, loss of human life, loss of limb and home, the rise of the police state and fascism here at home, crumbling infrastructure, crippling debt, crappy education and health care. It's good for liars, murderers, and psychopaths. So our theory here at March on the Pentagon is that if the U.S. didn't spend over $1 trillion a year maintaining empire, maintaining almost 1,000 bases in over 125, 130 countries, then we may actually have a chance to have a country that does provide universal health care, does provide education, good education from preschool all the way through university, housing as a human right, healthcare. Well, I already said that. Food, healthy food as a human right, not as a privilege for the 1%. So, Robbie, just take us a little bit further along that path of what could we be doing. I just think that if people, and I'm not talking about anybody on this call or watching this Facebook Live event, but if people don't care about the tens of thousands of people the U.S. maims on a daily basis, could they care about having a more compassionate society where people didn't have to struggle every day for basic needs in one of the wealthiest, well, maybe the wealthiest country, on the planet right now, except for it's a priority of where the money goes, which is very unhealthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, most regular Americans do not want war. They don't want to go to war, especially right now. I believe the polling reflects that. Um, it's the problem of, after 9/11, everyone was spurred into this basically a propagandized mindset into thinking that we needed to go to war based on all these false pretenses, not just the WMD pretense, but also the pretense that Al Qaeda was some kind of geostrategic threat that we needed to, be in an infinite war against. So I think that, generally speaking, I believe even a lot of people on the right now, which is strange to me, but a lot of people on the right now, I mean, even Trump won the election partly by being a critic of the Iraq war. So I think in general, basically saying you're against war is almost become kind of a popular mainstream thing. But I believe that the rhetoric in and of itself is obviously not enough. Since it's so easy now to just say you're against war, I believe that it needs to be, essentially backed up with a much more coherent and stronger foundation than just simply the rhetoric. So, part of it, I think, and this is just a beginning step that I've been trying to tell people, is it's not just going against the wars as they come right now. It's also going against the things that you were describing before that have been created as a result of the post 9/11 landscape, like the police state, the ever increasing police state. So I think that a really important factor of this is almost to reclaim, at the very least, as a starting point, to reclaim the pre 9/11 mindset that we had before the Bush era, before the Obama era, before the Trump era, and remember at the very least that the war on terror, especially, is a false construct that we should wholeheartedly reject as a starting point, and as a result of that, pretty much any military endeavors that are outcropping of that, we should resist as well. And then you also have the sort of the regime change wars, like what's happening in Iran and Venezuela right now. So I believe that to really tackle this in a serious way, we need to address both paradigms. Um, so that's what I've been trying to tell people recently, because I think a lot of people who speak out against war now, they don't they don't do it strongly enough. They accept the premise of what the war on terror is and these infinite bombing campaigns in the Middle East or drone attacks, but only oppose these sort of regime change wars. But I'm making the argument that they're all sort of blended together at this point. We almost can't make a distinction really. So um, I guess that's just something that I'm trying to tell people a lot now is that we can't forget that the war on terror is based on a lie, and it also is an illogical concept about essentially fighting against a tactic. We're never going to defeat, militarily. It makes no sense to think that we can defeat Islamic radicalism or whatever, negative buzzword you want to use to describe it. It's always going to exist. It doesn't pose a threat to the United States, and it really never did. So I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent about the war on terror, but if someone else wants to jump in. Cindy, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Do I have to be on screen for people to hear me? So when I was growing up, of course, it was communism. That the communists were our big threat. And so we had to fight in, Korea. We had to fight in Vietnam. We had to have this proxy war in Afghanistan against communism. And they called it the domino effect. If Vietnam fell, then this would fall, and that would fall, and that would fall, and eventually communism would fall. And what happened in the 80s when the USSR actually did collapse? Where was the enemy then? Who was going to be our enemy? So you said that the terrorists weren't even actually a threat, but the terrorists were created by the United States. There's a lot of information that Osama bin Laden was a CIA asset, and of course we know that the so-called terrorists or rebels in Syria are being supported. A lot of them were being supported by the U.S. and Israel and Saudi Arabia. So there always needs to be an enemy. If there's not an enemy, then you can't have wars, and you can't spend these, billions and billions of dollars on the war machine. And terrorism seems to be, I think, even a more brilliant strategic enemy than communists, where communists could actually be pretty much contained to certain countries, but terrorists can be anywhere now, right? So they can be living next door or at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, if you will.
Yeah. And I mean, and even a similar thing happened with the idea that, terrorists or / communists could be among us. I mean, John Walker Lind is an example of, they were trying to really blast that out as a means to make us feel that, any middle-class American could become radicalized by this belief system and become a threat to us. Very similar to how, during the McCarthy era, a lot of communists, or, not even communists, but people who were just artists or eccentric people who had negative things to say about the government were basically put on a blacklist as being communists. So it's similar in that regard as well. And yeah, I mean, and of course, speaking of communism, here we are, how many years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, constantly obsessing again about Russia when it's not even communist. So there seemed to be, and it seems like we've kind of moved past it to a certain extent, but it even seemed there was a few years there where we were really headed to some kind of serious potential military confrontation with Russia. And that, at the moment seems to have possibly died down. But that's still a serious reality as well. the idea of that these things, or that that World War III is like a fantasy. It's never going to happen. I mean, there was a period, especially around 2015, even during the Ukraine situation, where it seemed like there could have been an actual military confrontation between Russian and American troops. So we can't forget that. And that could happen again. I mean, Syria is still a tinderbox. And what's happening with Iran right now, especially, also involves, geostrategic players like Russia, who are essentially on their side. So, but I see Syria sort of as the moment where, another world power stepped in and told the United States, you can't just keep running rampant around the world in this war on terror and doing whatever the hell you want. So in that regard, I think, Putin's Russia, or Putin, whoever made that decision to tell the United States no, what made a very good decision. It really did sort of freeze up or throw a wrench into this sort of, global military industrial complex that's just sort of eating up smaller pieces of the world, every single day.
Well, right, exactly. I just did an interview the other day, and after the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. was basically the only superpower in the world, and now we see the rise of China and Russia. That's kind of putting a balance of power back in, where I think Russia and China have been supporting Venezuela as much as they can, and so I think that it's only good. I wish that there were no powers to be balanced. I wish that the United States and others would give up their nuclear arms and give up their empire. But who else is going to put a check on the United States?
Exactly. I mean, so that's why it's, like, even, and I don't actually personally believe the narrative that Russia leaked the DNC leaks, but even if they did do it,
I don't either.
I mean, even if they did do it, that's, that's a good thing. It exposed the corruption in the United States. But yeah, I mean, you brought up Venezuela earlier. I think that's actually a really good example of how much the establishment and even the mainstream media lies about what's actually going on, and paints Russia as this, threatening entity in situations like Venezuela. That's a great example, because Russia was actually sending humanitarian aid to the Maduro administration. And while that was happening, the United States government and the Trump administration were acting like, why don't they take our aid? And then that whole stage scenario with the aid truck going through,
Right.
that was a total setup. That was a total, totally designed to create some kind of provocation. And it made no sense when you zoomed out and look at the bigger picture, because in the United States media here, they were making it appear that Maduro wasn't letting any aid in, and his country was collapsing, and the U.S. was trying to help. But it's like, meanwhile, Russia was sending tons of aid. The media just erases that part of the narrative because they want it to make it appear that all Russia is doing is, doing bad things, or meddling in our affairs or whatever. So I think it's, we need to look at all these scenarios. And whenever Russia enters into the picture, like even in Venezuela, in Iran, I mean, I would actually see that as a good thing. Because if it was just Iran sort of out there blowing in the wind by themselves, they might have already had regime change done to them. Because let's face it, actually having a nuclear weapon, in the case of North Korea, that's actually probably prevented them from being obliterated by the United States government to some extent. Right. Even though I actually don't think there's any credible evidence that Iran was seriously building nukes. I mean, I genuinely do believe it was for nuclear power. I think that, once again, if they had one, perhaps they might be in a stronger position. But it's really a shame that, and Cindy, as well as I do, you were very active during the Bush administration, how much we've been sort of beaten over the head with anti-Iranian propaganda for years
Right.
and years. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like it's almost been 2 decades of how long they've been trying to convince us to go to war with this country. And that's just unbelievable to me. I mean, that it's been that long. I mean, if it wasn't this drone being shot down recently, it was, the nuclear program before, even during the Iraq war. Cindy, you probably remember, they were constantly saying that the Iraqi insurgents fighting American soldiers were getting all their weapons from Iran. So why don't we do something about Iran then? I mean, so it's been forever. And this one, I think we need to almost be the loudest protesting against this in particular, because this, I mean, and not just because this could be a potential gateway into a World War III scenario, but because this is something they've been wanting to do forever. And we've seen how much they've been trying to do this. And it would just be absolutely devastating if we launched any kind of military strike on their country. There's no such thing as a quote unquote surgical strike on Iran where they're going to back down and be like, oh, okay, now we'll be okay. I mean, that's not going to happen. Same with Venezuela. They are too proud of a people, and they are also too smart of a people to allow the United States to boss them around like that. So I just really, really hope that we have time, especially to stop what's happening with the U.S. moves towards war with Iran right now.
Right. Well, this has gotten a little bit off our topic, but it's still an excellent topic, because March on the Pentagon is an anti-imperialist, anti-war. I moved, so now I have to move my computer. So we're an anti-imperialist, anti-war organization. We're against all imperialist wars. We don't support regime change wars. We don't say, well, the U.S. shouldn't sanction Venezuela, but, Maduro has to go or whatever. We don't, I personally actually like Maduro, but, it's not, it's not the right or lefts or centers or the United States or Colombia or Israel or anybody's business who is the leader of any country. So we support the people internationally who are being oppressed and occupied and bombed by United States imperialism. But the thing is, as much as I dislike Trump, I think that if Clinton had gotten in office, I think we'd already be at war with Iran.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's actually surprising in a way that we're not already in a war with Iran with John Bolton as Trump's National Security Council. So I honestly don't know. I think we might be in a more difficult spot with Russia if Hillary Clinton was president. It's hard to say about Iran, though, because the Trump administration specifically is working with a neocon think tank that actually doesn't traditionally have any support among the Democrats, called the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, that have always sort of been going above and beyond the normal DC consensus on Iran. So I'm not sure about that one, or actually Venezuela. I feel like that actually, especially Venezuela, might be unique to the people that Trump has collected together in his administration. And, especially with the appointment of Elliot Abrams, which was quite a strange appointment to do at the timing of that, when everything was sort of going up, heightened in Venezuela, that he appointed him. But I think back to something you were saying earlier, I think also something that a lot of regular Americans don't really think about or don't consider is that sanctions in and of themselves are war. They actually kill people, they hurt people, they harm people, they starve people. So even just the idea that we're not actively engaged in some kind of, we haven't attacked Iran yet, so that's good, but we need to also look at how harsh the sanctions the Trump administration that are being put on Iran right now. These are the harshest sanctions in history, and they're essentially trying to cripple Iran's economy so that something bad will happen there, just like they were trying to do with Venezuela. But I feel like the track against Iran is more aggressive and more insidious, because What the Trump administration has done is they have actually made it so that even just Iran exporting its own oil to countries they're allowed to export it to, very recently, the reason Iran seized this British oil tanker is because the UK seized one of their oil tankers because they were saying that they were illegally trying to ship it to Syria. I mean, so that's to the degree in which we are meddling with their ability to even just export their own oil right now, and that's a step beyond just a normal sanction that we would have put on them in the past. And we were also, it's interesting. One of the sanctions that sort of went under the radar is, the right wing made a huge deal about all that money that the Obama administration used to, quote unquote, bribe the Iranian government after, when they went into the deal with them. So what the Trump administration has tried to do is tried to prevent banks that operate in Europe from taking any money from any companies that deal with Iran. So it's not even like just punishing, or not allowing business to be done with Iran. It's actually punishing banks and other institutions in Europe that are holding any Iranian money of any kind, whether it be like a contract from a company. So they're really clamping down in a way that I have really never seen before. So I'm just hoping that people understand that what's happening right now is a form of economic warfare, and it's very dangerous. It's designed to not just cripple their economy, but to escalate the situation and to possibly make the Iranian government act more desperately. These things all these escalations and all these things will only lead to a bad outcome here. So we need to get into the streets. We need to make a huge deal about this potential Iran war. It sounds almost like it's become like a talking point now, where people say this will make the Iraq war look like a cakewalk, whatever that means. I mean, it's not even, you can't even put into words how devastating this would be, not just for the Iranian people, but for the world if this were to happen. So I cannot implore enough how important it is to protest and speak out against a potential war with Iran.
Thank you, Robbie. So the U.S. has actually been sanctioning Iran. Hold on, I'm going to close my door. The U.S. has actually been sanctioning Iran since the revolution in the 70s. Yes. So, and so anyway, let's bring it back to, what could the United States be doing if it wasn't spending, hundreds of billions of dollars every year on empire and empire maintenance. So we've talked a lot about Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela many times. I've been to Cuba many times. I go to Cuba and I know how poor their country is. And I know how, for 60 years, the United States has been putting sanctions and blockades on Cuba, but they've still managed to, house their people, feed their people, provide excellent health care and education to their people. And every time I go to Cuba, I just think, what could the United States do? First of all, what could Cuba do if the United States would stop the blockade? For a long time, when Clinton was president, he made it against the law for any country to trade with Cuba. And if any country traded with Cuba, then they couldn't trade with the United States for 6 months. So, but I just think that, if the United States stopped the blockade, and I don't know if they're sanctions, they just blocked them against Cuba, how well could Cuba be doing? But I just always think, if the United States took that money that it devotes to empires, to wars and empire maintenance, what the good that can be done in our country is almost infinite. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just one example of what you're talking about is this drone, this unmanned drone that was shot down in Iranian territory. The United States government said it was an international territory.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to believe the Iranians. This drone apparently cost over $150 million. This single drone. So multiply that by however many times, however many drones we have in the air. That's a single military vehicle. There is really no other thing that, you know, America spends its money on that's that ridiculous. That is, I mean, it's not just abhorrent, it's cartoonish. So, um, and not just the equipment. I mean, we can talk about the defense contractors and how much money they line their pockets with from these absurdly expensive products they sell for war, for killing people. But the amount of money that's spent on the amount of military personnel that are just all over the world. I mean, this is something I think that we've lost sight of, and I won't stay on the subject too long, but in the modern sort of debate about war, it's almost become a sort of like a populist right thing to oppose war now. But there's really nothing in that world of anti-war talk about just closing down all the military bases. That used to be more of a classic anti-war thing that I remember a lot of people saying in the early 2000s. Why do we have all these military bases and personnel all over the world? I mean, way more than any other country. It's not just the amount of spending we do, it's the amount of troop presence that we have all over the world. So both things need to be severely drawn back. And yeah, I mean, even just doing that, like removing all the, like, I don't know, half of the military bases would be more than enough to start providing free healthcare to people in the United States. It would be enough to, at least start some kind of real sort of public education, free, at the very least, free community college vouchers for people in the United States. So there are these little things which, maybe people, think that we need to, and I'm not saying this shouldn't be the standard, because obviously the standard should be to end all the wars forever and to, stop spending all this money. But we can even just get significant amounts of public funding back just from, closing down all these military bases. But so like, but the equipment, I mean, is definitely a big part of it. That we just need to we need to also bring more awareness, I believe, to the amount of money that we spend. Because I think when people really saw it, like you mentioned $1 trillion a year earlier, people really saw how it was broken down. And even just as something as simple as a pie graph showing how much we spend on the military versus other things in this country, I think would shock most average people. It might even shock, some of the most dyed-in-the-wool Republican, flag waving, patriotic Fox News viewers. So I think that just really seeing the amount we spend on military now versus, anything else is shocking enough. And I think that, sadly, most people are not even aware of that basic fact and that basic breakdown.
Well, Emma does have a question from our participants, but before you ask the question, Emma, so the United States spends more than the next 10 countries combined on defense. And of course, we know that there's nothing defensive about spending so much money on the military-industrial complex. And the countries that we're talking about, the poor countries that offer public services, social services to every citizen, they don't spend, I don't know what the percentage of their gross national product they spend on military, but it's a fraction. And so there's definitely a correlation to how much is spent on military and how much is not spent or spent on the population. And the thing is, as taxpayers, people give at least 55% of their taxes go to the military-industrial complex. So, I'm a war tax refuser, but I would gladly pay taxes if my taxes went to positive, healthy activities, not the military-industrial complex. So, Emma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before I go into a couple of questions that we're getting, I just wanted to say that I liked your idea, Robbie, about just making a simple pie chart to show people what that amount of money actually looks like. Because once we start talking about even the high hundreds of thousands of dollars, people can't, they don't understand what that actually is. And when we get into billions and trillions, very few people have a grasp of what that actually means. And I think a simple pie chart is a good way to do it.
And I think I want to direct everybody's attention to the National Priorities Project, and they will have a pie chart. The National Priorities Project, if you put in your town, if you put in your state, it'll tell you how much your state or town or city sends to the military-industrial complex. When I ran against Brown for governor, California was spending more to Washington, D.C. for the military than Russia spends totally every year on the military-industrial complex. So National Priorities Project. If people go there, they do have pie charts, and they break down, incrementally how much people spend on Empire.
Awesome. I just went over to that, and I'll post a link to that in the comments for anyone who wants to check that out.
I can't even figure out the comments. I'm so happy we have Emma.
All right, so we actually don't yet have a ton of questions because a lot of people are mostly in agreement with everything that is being said, which is great. But we do have a few, and maybe a few more have popped up, and I haven't scrolled down to the bottom yet. So please, if you do have questions for any of us, type it in and I'll try to catch it. It's kind of a lot of comments to go through, but I do have one here that says it's a question for Robbie and Cindy. How do we make the military-industrial complex bleed money, lose PR battles, and lock down the weapons proliferation by the death cult?
Legally
Go
speaking?
ahead, Robbie.
Without going full Sarah Connor on the military-industrial complex? God, that's a... How do you make them... What was the actual question? How do you make them bleed? Sounds almost like...
How to make them bleed money.
Okay, how to make them bleed money.
Yes.
Well, I mean...
they already are bleeding money.
Yeah. They don't care.
How do we stop that? How do we heal that wound is I think, a better question.
I think part of it is it sort of needs to be looked at from the other way around, where it's a lot of these defense companies only are able to exist and continue on because of the extreme, basically, subsidies the U.S. government gives them in the form of buying enormous amounts of weapons packages.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could get people in the government, and this is something that I think would actually kind of move the needle. And one good example of this that actually got on the mainstream media fairly recently, I guess maybe a year ago, that was pretty surprising. And maybe it's only because Trump is in office, because this is, seems to be the mainstream media's game these days, was when that Yemeni, when I think the Saudi military launched an attack that killed like a school bus full of Yemeni children in Yemen. And even CNN was showing that this was a Raytheon munition that was sold to Saudi Arabia from that U.S. weapons deal. And that was a kind of very interesting moment, because you never hear the media ever talk about these U.S. companies' bombs being used to kill children. So I was like, wow, that's really interesting. What if politicians started talking about these defense companies and how their bombs are killing children or just causing all this damage? What if, sitting congressmen or senators started talking about these companies in that way? On the House floor even, it sounds like maybe a very small thing, but I think that just doing that might start to make them bleed money to a certain extent. But at the same time, whoever is in power at that time could just choose to hand over infinite amounts of, U.S. contracts to them. So we need to also get someone into the presidency who has a problem with the way defense companies operate. So I think we need to, it's like, that's the idea of just defense companies and their role in this. It's kind of almost like a very recent thing that people are starting to talk about a lot more often. And I think we need to make it kind of a standard in the way that we talk about anti-war. moving forward. I mean, a lot of people already do talk about it, which is good, but I think like everybody needs to start including that. We just need to make it more part of the dialogue and actually sort of coherently, even break down maybe a pie chart with those companies. Like, how much does Lockheed Martin actually get of the U.S. taxpayer money? How much does Raytheon get? How much does Boeing get? How much does Northrop Grumman get? And what are they making that's causing all this, the most damage in the world? I mean, even the biggest polluter in the world is the U.S. military. So that's also an angle that needs to be spoken about.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Emma. So back in I think it was 1934, 1935. Major General Smedley Butler wrote a piece called "War is a Racket," and in it he talks about how much DuPont made on chemicals, how much the rubber companies made on tires, how much clothing companies made on T-shirts and boots, and it's just like it. He says the exact amount, and so even in today's dollars, it seemed extraordinary. But and this was during World War I. So it's not like something that has just started in 2016 when Trump was inaugurated, obviously. But the thing is, the problem with having Congress talk about it is like even this, the wild communist from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, and I kid. He was for the F-35 gets built in his town, right? So this is the issue. Every single congressional district has a war profiteer in it. So it's not really in their interest, and every single candidate gets money from those industries. So it's not in their interest to talk about the bombs and everything that drop. But and I've talked about this before. If you live in the United States, you don't live any further than 50 miles from a military-industrial complex installation. It might just be something as simple, and when I say simple, I'm not saying it's not evil, but something simple as a recruitment station. So if you can't, a military recruitment station. So if you can't join us in Washington, D.C. on October 11th, it would be good if you can organize a protest around your closest military-industrial complex, your closest war profiteer, your closest base, your closest recruitment office. And we're not afraid of stopping military recruitment. A lot of people in the anti-war, anti-war groups, they say that, we have to support the troops and we might offend the troops or whatever, but we want to stop them from becoming troops. But the thing is, in the working class in the United States, there's no work. There's no meaningful union work with good benefits, and that's practically disappeared. College is so expensive, and I don't think this is an accident. When I went to college, it was free. Now it's exorbitant. It's prohibitively expensive, and most people have to go into tens of thousands of dollars of debt to go to college. So this is an insidious cycle of a few people getting very rich and the rest of us just getting more poor, have to struggle more. So to me, while we're struggling to make ends meet, we should also be struggling against the system that is putting us where it is. And the empire is going to collapse. And it might be sooner than later, because empires always collapse. So are we going to be working together in communities to forestall or limit any kind of damage to us when that empire does collapse? So, but we just have to be there pushing it. I'm not for this, we need to reform it. We need to, make it a kinder, gentler, evil, destructive empire. It needs to go. And everything we do, in my opinion, there might be somebody on this call or somebody on the video who's saying, oh no, we don't want that to happen because that would be really hard. It's hard. It's hard already. And there's many people around the world because of this country that are being murdered, their communities are being destroyed, their lives are being destroyed. They're making $2 or $3 a day. They're working with slave wages. So we need to work together across any kind of demographic to say this is the most important issue, is ending the U.S. military-industrial complex. Then we can build a healthy society and a healthy world after that.
Amen to that.
I agree.
A woman.
Oh. All right, I've been looking through and I found a couple more questions. Got one from Adam Fitzgerald. He asks, if the war against Iran comes to fruition, do you see the war lasting longer than 5 years? And if this does happen, will it in time give us a recession worse than 2008, in your opinion? I guess either one of you, if you want to take that.
Robbie, why don't you take that? If you will.
It's dark. It's dark to think about it actually happening. I fear if it will be World War III. I don't think that it's just going to be contained as some kind of U.S.-UK alliance versus Iran and its whatever proxy allies. It's going to be Israel, potentially Saudi Arabia, and the United States, all together in unison, trying to wage this war against Iran. And just having Israel there in general, they have nuclear weapons. I just think it's such a precarious situation that it's not even a matter of how long it's going to last. I think it will be it'll be basically the last war that America tries to get involved in. I truly believe that. That's how devastating I think it will be. So in terms of a recession, I think that'll be a small thing compared to how bad the rest of it's going to be. I mean, I truly believe that if we have some kind of war with Iran, it could be the first time we see the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And that's a really scary thing to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Cindy?
Like Robbie said earlier, that I know since since Afghanistan, really, the neocons have had a plan to destabilize the Middle East, and I think that is a plan to make Israel feel more comfortable as a colonial settler state. And so we've seen a lot of that happening since Afghanistan. We've seen the destruction of Iran. We've seen the destruction of Libya. Now Yemen, and they tried to destroy Syria. That didn't work. It's not working, thankfully. They've been taking more and more territory. Israel has been taking more and more territory. Saudi Arabia has become a really good buddy of Israel and the United States. And I think that that Iran has long been the neocons' prize goal is to destabilize Iran. And so far, the strength that they've shown so the British takes an Iranian oil tanker, Iran will take a British oil tanker. The United States flies over Iranian airspace, Iran will shoot it down. So, I hate this quid pro quo of violence for violence, but I don't blame Iran for wanting to protect its sovereignty, protect its integrity. And so I think that while the people of the world are in the trenches literally fighting against the U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabian violence and occupation and war, we need to be over here also pushing in solidarity with them. So you don't have to wait till October. I know there's been a lot of communities. There's one community that's had a no hands off Iran every day. I don't know how long that's been. And like I said, Emma and I and a dozen others were in front of the White House. And we got, I think, a really good response from people. I think that people are really ready to just, and maybe it's because Trump's president, because, Obama was no peace person, and we really struggled to get any kind of support when we were, protesting Obama and whatever. But I think people are just ready to say, geez, enough is enough. God, I have $100,000 in debt. I can't get a good job. If I have to go to the doctor, I can't afford the copay. Housing is ridiculous, and etc. So yeah, I think that we just need to take to the streets. And I know that people in Syria, people in Afghanistan and Iraq, Yemen, I'm not even going to list, especially Venezuela and Cuba, because I am so close with Venezuela and Cuba, is that it really gives them a lot of moral support when they see us in the streets, when they hear us advocating for them. And we're advocating for them. And when we advocate for them, we're advocating really for ourselves and our families and our communities also. So it's not like we're over there, grabbing a rifle or whatever to fight with them, but we need to fight here for them and for our future.
I've noticed an increase in people just sharing like peace vigils and anti-war vigils that are happening in their towns lately. I'm in the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul, which is right next to Minneapolis, and there's a pretty decent-sized anti-war community here that is doing stuff all the time. There's multiple days a week that there's a weekly vigil happening where people are standing. Where people are, yeah, it was Cindy, sorry. Where people are on a bridge with signs for an hour during rush hour every week, and in different locations for different topics, different days of the week. And I'm seeing more examples of that happening in other places too. So that's always an option. Obviously, doing something like that isn't going to change things instantly, but we also need to reach more Americans so they're aware of what's going on. And I have found success personally in that method, just being out there with signs or at local events with I just went to one today and I was covered in anti-war stickers and was able to engage with people and have conversations. And that's a tiny piece of the puzzle, but people need to be more aware of what's going on and how it's personally affecting them. I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. And there's one question here that I've found it's pretty interesting. Somebody wants to know how we can possibly fight terrorism without war. And I think that a lot of us that are anti-war and aware of the actual consequences and implications of how this works know that what we're doing is breeding more terrorism. We're creating it, and then we have more war to fix it, and then it makes more terrorism. It's a cycle. But that's what a lot of people do ask that question. A lot of people that don't understand how that works. So do either of you have anything to kind of speak to that topic, or something that is good to, maybe a good response that people can use to tell their family and friends that have that question, since a lot of people do?
I'll go first. So I know after 9/11, 2001, remember the pastor Jeremy Wright from the church in Chicago that the Obamas went to? He said the chickens have come home to roost. And he got all kinds of hate for that because, of course, we were told that the U.S. was attacked on 9/11 because the terrorists hate our freedom and democracy, right? And so, of course, it's been a long program. I mean, British colonialism. What happened to Robbie?
I don't know.
Robbie, did you fall out of your chair? Are you okay? British colonialism, French colonialism, Dutch colonialism in the Middle East, Africa, and U.S. colonialism in many, many, many places. But anyway, especially since in 1954, when the U.S. overthrew a democratically elected president in Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and it ushered in the reign of terror of the Shah of Iran. And of course, like, look at the war, the first Gulf War, where the U.S. ambassador told Saddam Hussein, "Oh, go ahead and go to Kuwait and get your oil back because we're not going to do anything about it." And of course, the U.S. had a response to that. The U.S. told some people a community in Iraq, "Go ahead and rise up against Saddam. We'll help you." And they just left those Iraqis there. And then when Clinton was president, the U.S. had crippling sanctions against Iraq, bombed every week with the UN and NATO, killed by a very low estimate 500,000 children. I talked to a female doctor who was working at that time in a hospital. She said it was more like 1 million children and over 2 million people were killed during the sanction period of the Bill Clinton administration. And then, all of the state terrorism against innocent civilians in the Middle East. And I think that at the best, and that's kind of a weird thing to say, if the official story of 9/11 was true, and I don't believe the official story of 9/11 was true, but even if it was, that wasn't an act of war. It was a crime. And if the U.S. had really taken what Jeremiah Wright, I think it's Jeremiah, I think I said Jeremy, what Jeremiah Wright said, and said, how can the United States be a better citizen of the world, then maybe it would have gone a long way to healing and the acts of terrorism. And you'll have to see, many of the so-called terrorist acts have been either false flags or they've been fomented by the FBI. And so the FBI reaches out to disaffected Islamic youth, and then they'll give them a bomb that doesn't work. But then it's entrapment. So a lot of these terrorist acts are just used to keep people in the United States afraid and keep us saying, oh yeah, spend more money on the war machine. I don't care if my kids don't have medicine or enough food to eat. At least they're safe. Not caring about the kids in the other parts of the world that aren't safe, the kids in Iraq, the babies who are still being born. Vietnam, the kids still being born in Vietnam with birth defects because of what the United States did there. So maybe if the United States was a positive actor on the world stage and not such a violent bully, then maybe many acts of terrorism and many, like Emma said, what we do breeds terrorism. Maybe we would go towards making friends, not making enemies.
Yeah, well put. Can you reread the question really quick, Emma? What was the exact question about? How do we fight terrorism if we don't wage a war against it? Was that what the person was asking?
Let's see if I can find it. It was pretty far up
Something
there.
like that. How do we fight terrorism without war?
Yep. How do we fight terrorism without war? I'm gonna mute you, Cindy, while Robbie answers because you're a little bit loud. There's some feedback with you. Okay.
Oh, it's a fan. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So I would say, first of all, that the very point of what these, these terrorist attacks are is they're designed to hit soft targets that are largely undefendable. That's sort of the point of it. So, I mean, the idea that anyone could do something horrible, like in a crowd of civilians or at a shopping mall, I mean, unless we have a fully locked down police state, there's really no way to prevent something like that from happening. Life is risky. There are many school shootings. Children now, when they go to school, are fearful that someone might bring a gun and start shooting everybody. There's really, unless you want to fully lock down all schools and turn them into police states in and of themselves, these things cannot be, stopped really in any logical sense. So it really actually makes no sense to think that some kind of military engagement could stop the idea of, quote unquote terrorist attacks. If we're looking at it through the prism of saying, oh, we need to defeat Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, what's the other one? I don't even remember. ISIS. If we want to defeat them, well, I'd say that it's actually too late. The ideology that springs from, Al-Qaeda or that Wahhabist sort of ideology, and let's actually state for the record that people who go around saying all Wahhabists are dangerous terrorists, that's a huge distortion. There are plenty of people who actually subscribe to a very radical sort of Wahhabist sect of Islam that don't conduct terrorist acts, don't commit violence. So, like, a lot of these things are very distorted, and I think that people really got their brains broken, frankly, after ISIS came onto the scene and started releasing snuff videos. Because before that, I feel like we had started to decondition ourselves in this country to be like, yeah, I mean, you're less likely to get killed in a terrorist attack than you are to get struck by lightning. Like, why are we making such a big deal about this? Even if you factor in the 9/11 attacks, which the Bush administration had, dozens and dozens and dozens of possibilities to prevent them. They were warned amply to prevent them. So let's just factor that in. Even the statistics of getting actually killed or harmed in a terrorist attack are still extremely, extremely low. But I would say ISIS really did sort of effectively fearmonger the American public into thinking we need to do something about these people. So you'll even see now people who were traditionally in the anti-war scene completely being passively accepting of the idea of endless bombing campaigns as long as they are targeted at ISIS, for example. So there's a strange disconnect there, I see, because to me, it doesn't matter how quote unquote heinous or evil you think these people are. We shouldn't be bombing these other countries, full stop. We should stop bombing them. It doesn't matter who's over there. And so I guess I just don't understand how any person, when just using the framework of logic, could think that military engagement would be a way to stop terrorism. You cannot fight against a tactic. I know that's something that people repeat all the time, but I will never stop mentioning it. You can't fight against it. And to top it off, what Cindy said about how a lot of this largely stems from not just, the idea of blowback from us meddling so much in these other countries in various ways, but a lot of this is funded by us and was originally sponsored by us. I mean, even the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the people who allegedly later attacked us on 9/11, you can draw a straight line back from that to the Mujahideen, and as well as ISIS, forces in Iraq and Syria. A lot of that funding and a lot of the weapons are kind of indirectly coming from U.S., Saudi Arabia, Israeli programs. So it's all a joke. I mean, don't buy it. I would just really implore not to buy this idea that the West is engaged in some kind of real war against terrorism. This is basically a blanket excuse for the U.S. empire to buy time after 9/11. I mean, that's really what it is. Like Cindy said, the empire is collapsing. It's inevitable that we will see some kind of eventual decline or collapse. And 9/11 attacks was a means to buy time, and the war on terror is a scam to get us to accept this idea of perpetual warfare against a faceless enemy. So I think it's very basic. And I think just using logic in this regard can cut through a lot of the indoctrination in ways that people have been basically brainwashed and fear-mongered over this.
Good response. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to add to that, Cindy?
Hi. So, the great Howard Zinn said, war is terrorism with a bigger budget. And so I would just say, don't believe the justifications for war that MSNBC, CIA, or CIANN are telling you, because they're propaganda. And I'm not going to go through like Fox News, of course, faux news. They're all, propaganda arms for the military-industrial complex. So, or the politicians. Don't buy what the politicians are telling you or justification for war. It's just all for profit. It's all for recess. I need a recess. What do you call it? A Freudian slip. It's all for resource domination and capitalism to spread markets, and the baseline is it's all for profit. So the best way to not have war against terrorists is to stop creating terrorists. And do you have any other comments? Or you have a comment, right, Emma?
Yeah, I just thought we're a little over an hour now, so we're probably gonna end this soon. But I just saw a nice comment, switching gears quite a bit. But somebody commented and said that they got one of our Rage Against the War Machine t-shirts, and when they wore it for the first time the other day, 3 people already asked what it is and what the shirt's about, and led to a great conversation in one day, which is really nice. And I've had that experience with the shirt too. I wish I had one on right now to show it, but I don't. But thanks for that comment. That's really encouraging and exciting.
Very. I have the same experience too.
Yeah.
So we're going to have another fundraiser in about 3 weeks, so you can buy more shirts or buy a shirt or whatever. So I've had the same experience wearing my shirt, and they've led to really awesome conversations. So, but we want it to lead to more than just conversations, but education really is the first plank in building a movement. And so that's why we have these monthly conference calls. We call them our community conference calls. I want to really thank Robbie Martin again for being on our call. Oh, there I am. Being on the call this month. I think it's been an amazing call, and it's going to be it's recorded, right, Emma?
Mm-hmm.
So what people can do immediately after we post a recording is start sharing it, and go to marchonpentagon.com.
Yeah, this one will stay on Facebook, so even after we're not live anymore, you can still keep commenting. You can talk to the other people that have been commenting. You can share it to wherever you want to, and then it will also be posted on our website, because I'll post it on YouTube for all the people that don't do Facebook that I really appreciate, those people.
Yeah. And I want to really thank Emma. Emma is a rock star. She does so much. She has a young family. And she does so much for the movement in many different venues, alternative media, peace organizations, anti-imperialism. And, I just couldn't do it without Emma. So I'm going to give Emma a big
thank you.
Yay, Emma.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah.
Thank you guys, too. Yeah, did either of you want to say anything else that we missed? Anything to close? Robbie, do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find my ranting and ravings about war and neocons on Twitter. I'm there at Fluorescent Gray. And I've also put out a 3-part documentary series about the group of neocons who I believe are most responsible for laying the groundwork for the post 9/11 era. It's called The Very Heavy Agenda. You can find that at averyheavyagenda.com.
I just put a link to your Twitter and a link link to veryheavyagenda.com in the comments for anybody who doesn't want to type that in themselves. You can just click on that there. And yeah, Robbie, I hope that you can join us in October in DC, because you're totally in line with everything we're about. And we need more people there. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
The more the merrier, right?
Yes, and the more the merrier, and the more the useful. We're strength in numbers. We need people.
The more the effective. And we are. One thing I neglected to mention, and I will, is we are planning to do some civil resistance. So you know, raising a little ruckus, doing some shenanigans. So.
Excellent.
Always fun. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and like I said, please share this, and we'll be around. So I'm gonna end it now. Bye. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Cindy.
Awkward goodbye.
Yes, awkward goodbye.